Welcome back to the channel. I am the Darklight Emissary, and this video is on the Chamber Militant of the Ordos Xenos branch of the Inquisition, the Deathwatch, who suffer not the alien to live. The Deathwatch are at the pinnacle for the Imperium's long-held anti-Xenos or alien policies, a spear into the hearts of the Imperium's most ancient of foes like the Orcs or Drukhari, amongst many others. Long before the Chaos Gods enacted their grand plan to blunt the Emperor's Great Crusade, the Crusade almost was ravaged to its core when it ran into a Xenos empire on the eastern fringes, known as the Rangden Xenocide Wars, which saw entire legions of Space Marines, think over 100,000 individuals, possibly decimated by tens of thousands. There's even rumor at least one of the missing two legions, at least their Primarch, met their end during this early conflict. The Emperor himself had to fight against the Rangden to ensure their defeat, and the Emperor himself was even threatened, supposedly, by some of the most powerful and mightiest Orc war bosses ever encountered by the Imperium. And the same happened shortly after the Horus Heresy era, with the War of the Beast, where the Orcs again threatened the very integrity of the nascent Imperium that had just survived its first near death against its own legions of Space Marines. Although there is some speculation and argument on how much of a threat these war bosses were to the Emperor, but that isn't a topic for this video. Suffice it to say, alien species in the 40k setting are not the alien species of Star Wars or Star Trek. Those settings do have some powerful, fearsome alien species, but it's usually ones with the ability to negotiate with the humans and other species, or even ally with them on occasion. In 40k, most of the species the Imperium has encountered are non-negotiable ravenous monsters, I'd argue. There are definitely incidents of Xenos species that could have become allies of the Imperium had their policy been not quite so extreme and fanatical against anything slightly inhuman. I'd argue at the same time, the Emperor's policy against the alien was made due to the sheer amount of hostile species the galaxy is inhabited by, like the Orcs, who are largely non-negotiable with very few exceptions, or nightmares like the Drukhari, who will casually torture you if you are unlucky enough to be captured during one of their raids, your skin spread over the size of a football field to scream in agony for centuries that way. This is the caliber of foe that the Imperium bases off in. One of these speculations is it is possible that perhaps that at the beginning of the Great Crusade, the Emperor had slightly lesser policy against Xenos species, and this is purely my speculation on this. And when the Rangden were encountered, the Emperor changed the policy to absolute utter aggression against all Xenos species, in an attempt to avoid the casualties that conflict incurred upon the Great Crusade. Those records are sealed though, so if this contributed, nearly no one in the Imperium may even know that, and up until the heresy, the Emperor's words were largely never questioned, let alone his laws or policies. Even deeper into the Great Crusade, there were some occasions where alien species were debated whether to make them a protectorate of the Imperium instead of fight them. This happened as a possibility with both the Laeron and the Interrex, though this was very uncommon and ultimately never occurred, both eventually scoured from history by the uncompromising legions of the Space Marines and their Primarch lords. And so it is no surprise that eventually the Imperium wanted to create a specialist form of chapter to focus on the most persistent and ancient threat the Imperium faces, the alien threat. More apt than ever with emerging threats like the ancient Necrons or the ravenous Tyranids descending upon the galaxy in hopelessly numberless swarms. When the Deathwatch was first created is not specifically known, but the Inquisition gathered many chapter masters of Space Marines into a conclave and council, and at the conclusion of this conclave, these chapter masters agreed to help form a new chapter. The exact number of chapters who agreed is unknown, nor who they were exactly. The way the Deathwatch works is different from any other chapter, and I would speculate that they are possibly one of the most numerous chapters. They seem to not follow the Codex Astartes, which makes sense since they do not recruit normally, nor do they have their own gene seed to repopulate from. Instead, the chapter is made up exclusively of veterans from other chapters, so by the time a new Deathwatch Marine arrives for duties, they're already a renowned warrior in their own right. If a Marine shows an unusual aptitude for fighting aliens, this is often noticed by their chapter master, and leadership in general. Eventually, they may be offered a place in the Deathwatch. Part of this process is the Marine will paint their armor black, because while Space Marines in general are known for going into the worst crucibles of conflict in general, specialist chapters, like the Deathwatch, are created to go into the absolute worst situations imaginable. Much like the Grey Knights are this for demonic incursions, if you see a Deathwatch kill team as a normal human, you are not celebrating, because your planet is probably already 90% devoured by a Tyranid hype fleet or other horrifying alien entity at that time. The Deathwatch may save your world, but you are probably not going to live to see that victory by the time they arrive. And so the Marines paint their armor black, in a solemn knowledge that most likely they will never see their home chapter or brothers again, once seconded to this chapter. However, they do not often forget their own chapter, and they are permitted, possibly encouraged, to keep up their own chapter traditions and culture. Indeed, this is part of the power of this chapter. It is a great alloy of many chapter traditions across the entirety of the Imperium, each of their specializations coming together into unique and endless combinations, as endless and unique as their alien foes tend to be. Due to the threat that these Marines face, they are gifted with the best war gear available to Space Marines. Basically, all of them are given an Artificer level armor, and their leaders even more ancient and unique suits of power armor. Each of the Deathwatch bases throughout the Imperium hold at their heart a myriad amount of unique and ancient artifact weapons. The Tech Marines of this chapter have access to some of the rarest weapons the Imperium still employs. The last video was on some unique weapons in the Imperium, one of these being vortex weapons. I imagine these weapons are some of the ones they have, along with even sometimes Xenos technology, although I haven't read or seen that employed. Certainly Inquisitors in the Ordo Xenos have been seen on the extreme side to use alien weaponry and tech to defeat their foes. But I will say, this often brings even Inquisitors sometimes into conflict with the Deathwatch themselves, because while this chapter by its nature is somewhat more flexible and less dogmatic than some chapters who are absolute monoliths on their culture, they still tend to trend towards a more puritanical view and not radical one. One other weapon I have brought up related to vortex weapons were vortex ammunition for bolters. I'd imagine you may find that possibly only in the Deathwatch kill squad going up against the worst alien threats they are hunting down. But again, this is my speculation and thoughts, because when I heard that sort of weapon exists, I wondered who would even have those, since even most Space Marine chapters have uncommon equipment, but often not that exotic. One of the most interesting things I have found regarding the Deathwatch that I didn't know before researching was that the Deathwatch has multiple chapter masters, known as watch commanders. I had thought, and perhaps this is older canon now that I was familiar with, I haven't read really a lot of Deathwatch content. The last book I think I remember seeing Deathwatch Marines in was the original Ultramarines Omnibus against the Tyranids, and that was 15-ish years ago by now. Anyways, what I had always thought up until now was that Deathwatch Marines served for about 10 years or some other predetermined amount of time before returning to their own chapters. Apparently this is not the case. These Marines are with the Deathwatch for an undetermined amount of time, mostly. Often they do not return home until the Inquisitor deems their duty to the Deathwatch done. And thus, we eventually get the Watch Commanders, the ones that have both been around the longest, and are also the pinnacle of a Space Marine warrior in both action and tactical or strategic capability. To take on the mantle of Watch Commander is to all but guarantee that the Marine will never return to their original chapter again. These Marines are respected by Inquisitors utterly, even the most senior of Inquisitors. And Watch Commanders, it seems to be a rumor, can even be recruited to become Inquisitors to some capacity eventually themselves. I am not sure where the source for this comes from, I'll be honest. If someone wants to enlighten me on it, it was simply in one of the online wikis, so I don't know if it is someone's headcanon being written into the articles. But I will say, having spent 17-ish years reading lore for this universe, I have never once heard of a Astartes as an Inquisitor. Although I imagine if several of the most senior Inquisitors are Space Marines, they aren't going to be forthcoming on their origins. I imagine both some Inquisitors and Space Marine chapters wouldn't be thrilled by that development, and certainly some Inquisitors seem big enough and powerful enough to rival even a Space Marine in combat. Some of the art seems to depict that sort of thing, at least. Inquisitors in something approaching Terminator armor sometimes, but again, pure speculation. This is not canon, simply something I find curious, that these specific Marines are stuck in their positions so long they could be absorbed by the Inquisition proper. If that's the case, it's news to me, and something I've learned, although I'm a little bit suspect on that. Deathwatch Marines don't form formal companies of 100 Marines. They instead form teams of often 4, with a captain commanding them, and often each of these Marines comes from a completely different chapter. Occasionally, even chapters that are at odds with each other and hate each other. Each team formed to take on a specific task and enemy. I imagine Marines that are specialists in fighting orcs are organizing to kill teams together, or Tyranids, so on and so forth. I imagine kill teams are organized based upon each Marine's chosen alien they are best against. But this isn't always the case or possible. Sometimes the alien threat is unknown completely, so a kill team is sent to understand and adapt to that threat. Just as with all things dealing with the Imperium, infighting happens sometimes, and it's not unknown for a Ordos Xenos Inquisitor to offer up a Deathwatch kill team to fight rivals in another branch of the Inquisition, like the Ordo Hereticus, who are often the fanatical Inquisitors who will kill often very loyal citizens of the Imperium for the slightest of infractions, leading to conflict within the other entire whole branches like the Xenos Inquisitors. Though this must be a rare occasion, since mostly they are specialized for fighting the endless alien threats the Imperium still faces. The value of these small teams cannot be understated. One of the examples I have from reading stuff is the Ultramarines novel, chronicling the invasion of one of the Tyranid hive fleets in Ultramarine space. A kill team was dispatched to help defeat this threat, and Uriel Ventress, a well-known captain in the Ultramarines and the main character of this novel, had originally been in the Deathwatch for a time, and he painted his armor black yet again and joined this kill team to board a Tyranid hive ship and slay the Norn Queen there, largely ending the threat of the Great Devourer for a time to the Kingdom of 500 Worlds. As far as I am aware, this was one of the first times the Imperium really figured out how to defeat a Tyranid hive fleet, and a Deathwatch kill team was the one to enact the final blow to defeat the threat. One other thing I will bring up I found really cool about the Deathwatch is that on occasion, a Marine will arrive at a watch station and offer their services to the watch commander in the Deathwatch. This Marine will have no heraldry to begin with, and due to some long-held tradition, the watch commander will accept their service without questioning their background or what chapter they came from originally. These are known as Black Shields, like the ones of old, who are also often of unknown heraldry. Despite the acceptance these Marines can find from Deathwatch, many of the Marines in the Deathwatch see these ones as some sort of ill omen and possibly distrust them a bit, coming from an unknown past and being mysterious as they are. And that is a bit about the Deathwatch. I was surprised by some of the things I learned about them. Some of this lore is interesting, if a bit suspect at times. I often kind of overlooked them. I like the concept of them generally. Uniting a bunch of different cultures together is kind of always interesting to me, but just have never made them much of a study. I think I will try to find some of the books that feature them more. At the very least, it can be a way to expose myself to more chapters of Marines and the interplay between their beliefs and combat doctrines. Though I've never heard of any particularly good thing about Deathwatch books. If you know of a specific good one that you like, please let me know. As always, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Please leave a comment for discussion or requesting a future topic. I'd love to cover a topic or question you have. One thing to bring up here is if you view the pinned comment for the last few videos, including this one, I have opened up a Discord for those of you who want a bit of community for discussing the lore in general 40k setting. The link will be active for about another 5 or 6 days currently, but I will be renewing it often. But I want to avoid the potential for overwhelming the server too fast as well if things continue to pick up momentum on this channel. I hope to see you there though, where we can pick up discussion on anything you'd like to chat about, both in 40k and out of it. Bring your light into the dark places, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you, and have a great day or night wherever you are.